أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. My dear respected brothers and sisters, I'll begin with the customary and the sunnah advice of the Prophet ﷺ in khutbahs, that we all commit to taqwa, which is fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of mindfulness of Him. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahmatullahi alayhi once famously said that taqwa isn't that a person does a high number of nawafil. I'm paraphrasing what he said, that a person does a high number of nawafil at night and fasts a long day during the day, does all of these extra optional ibadah, but in between there is confusion, right? But rather, taqwa is that a person fulfills that which is obligatory in the deen and avoids those things that are haram in the deen. But ultimately, the bottom line in taqwa is that a person fulfills their obligations of the deen, and this is the minimum that I must commit to and that we all must commit to. So, moving on from that, today's topic. I saw a video circulated on the internet, and it's very contextual because it's to do with it was, on the one hand, it was a particular interaction between the far right and Muslims. A far right leader interviewed a Muslim in Jerusalem and asked him questions. Some of you have seen this. Asked him questions, and the brother said things. Now, discussing the video and what was said isn't my point. I'm going to frame it as follows. The brother said things that expressed his personal Muslimness. Okay, just listen to what I'm saying for a second. He expressed his personal Muslimness, right? But spoke of it as though his personal Muslimness was Islam. He represented his personal Muslimness as Islam, right? And this idea of Muslimness is something that thinkers, writers, and academics have recently coined. The idea of people's personal and subjective expressions of Muslimness, how Muslims are in the way that they live in real life, in societies, in communities, in our interactions, right? That is our Muslimness, and that means that it sometimes beautifully accords with Islam, right? That our Muslimness, sometimes our Muslimness and our Islam, they're in I wouldn't say perfect harmony, but they're in good harmony, right? We can see how they come together. You could say that our attendance here in Jum'ah, in congregation, in large numbers, is both an expression of our Islam and an expression of our Muslimness, and they both marry nicely and strongly together. But sometimes they clash. Okay? And in this situation, they clashed in a direct attempt at trying to very publicly and authoritatively represent Islam and the Muslim community to a bigot, right? Who, with millions of followers, who basically has been milking it ever since. Right? So I want to reflect on how the contradictions play out and what the dangers are. So first and foremost, I'll skip straight to the danger. The danger is Islam, or our, our expression of Islam is only and always when we do something as a Muslim, and that something authentically agrees with what is normative in Islam, right? And by that I mean the normal accepted practices of Islam, of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and ideally in their fullest breadth. In their fullest breadth. What that means is authentic expressions of Islam, especially, brothers and sisters, in our context. I'm trying to word this carefully so we all understand it. Especially in our context, authentic expressions of Islam are not how some of us choose to be Muslims within the confines of a particular interpretation, right? Or within the confines of a particular madhab, or within the confines of a particular ideology or movement, or valid, remember I'm not talking about anything invalid here, or valid cultural expression. For example, something that is Islamically valid, but it's very Pakistani, that the Arab Muslims are particularly familiar with, right? Or something very characteristically Arab that the Bengali Muslim isn't familiar with. But you can see its connection. You can see that it falls within the broader principles of Islam and the parameters of Islam, right? But however, they are not common between those two people. They are not common between those two expressions. You can think about the way some of us get married. You can think about our food and diet and the way we cook our foods, and many other expressions that fall within the parameters of Islam, within the purview of Islam, fall within the principles of Islam, and therefore are valid. But they are not commonly shared. Meaning the Muslims of Europe who have their own distinct Islam, and I mean Islam, not Muslimness, meaning they have their own distinct expressions of Islam that fall within what is valid in Islam, is very, very distinct. When we visit Muslim countries, it's very different, right? It's not something that we share commonly. But we can say that it is an expression of Islam or Islamness, because it is not something, there is no clash. So here, you can say it's our Muslimness, but it's not an expression of Muslimness that clashes with Islam. Okay? But the point is, and this is very important, when we're dealing with an increasingly hostile environment. The point is, it's no longer okay to now be oblivious to these things, right? Yes, we have unique challenges from the right wing and so on, but Allah has also uniquely endowed us, right, with an education, right, with higher literacy rates, which enable us to see through some of these complexities, with greater access to news and to media and to understand context, with the ability and the mental headspace to take a greater interest. It's not an excuse anymore to make silly mistakes that land the whole community in trouble, that misrepresent all of us, that even put us in danger. It's not acceptable. But what is the mistake? The mistake is that we express our individual Muslimness as Islam. As Islam, my Bengali expression of Muslimness, which is not outside of the parameters of Islam. It's not. It's valid, right? Whether it's your curry, or the way you marry your daughters, or the way you set up marriages, whatever it is, right? Or maybe even particular quirks of your masajid in a predominantly Pakistani area, or predominantly Bangladeshi area, or predominantly Arab area. While these things are valid, it is not acceptable to present them as the only expression of Islam. As the only expression of Islam. So what this brother did was he basically said, you know what, you have a bad impression of Islam. And the problem here was, one of the things he did was he said, you have a bad impression of Islam because you grow up among Muslims like so-and-so in such and such an area, but you didn't grow up among Muslims like the ones I grew up with. Okay? Now, okay, maybe the Muslims that this guy grew up around, right, were doing things that aren't acceptable in Islam, right? But he didn't frame it as Islam. He framed it culturally, framed it racially, framed it in terms of culture and racial background, right? What has that got to do with Islam? But somehow, this right-wing bigot has got the wrong impression of Islam because he grew up with a different group of Muslims. And maybe what he grew up with and what he got to witness were things that were against Islam. But that's not the lesson. That obviously, the interview was terrible. But what the problem is here is that my point is that this is an extreme case in this video. And those of you who've seen it will know this. But we do it, but the principle behind it, the underlying problem, right, is something that we are regularly guilty of. We are regularly guilty of presenting Bengali Muslimness as Islam, of Pakistani Muslimness as Islam, without qualification, without clarification, without engaging in intelligent conversation, which, by the way, somebody that you're trying to give dawah to, or you're somebody that you're trying to have dialogue with deserves. They don't deserve the misrepresentation that you are about to put them through. They don't deserve the confusion that you are about to put them through as a result of your poor articulation. You've got to do better. Now, we do it all the time. Okay. Sometimes, and this is, so far, I've dealt with this issue in the case of, valid expressions of Muslimness, right? Well, there's no contradiction. And then there's times when our expression of Muslimness, my personal expression of who I am as a Muslim, my cultural expression of who I am as a Muslim, sometimes, children, Assalamu alaikum. You guys okay? You guys are giving a khutbah as well. Okay, come on, stay quiet. All right. Sometimes our personal expression of Muslimness is an expression of the haram. Is an expression of flagrant disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is an expression of deep-rooted deep-rooted nationalism or asabiyya, even racism, or even a very particularly obvious expression of Western feminism, right? And we represent it as Islam. It's Islam because it's me. It's, there's something deeply egotistical about it as well. I'm a Muslim. Look, Muslims are like me as well. So, why should you have a problem with us? But what you do when you do that with your particular expression of Muslimness, it could be, it could be somebody who doesn't pray at Salah time, right? Doesn't pray at Salah time. Could be somebody who's okay to Deal with interest. Okay, so I recently bought these real life examples of the impression we create, right, in the dawah space. What I mean is among non-Muslims. So I was buying a product that was referred to me by somebody else in the community, and it was expensive. I couldn't afford it, but I had to get it in installments. But it had to be interest free, right? And this particular product was interest free. So the salesman visits my house, and we get into it. And this is my opportunity to give a bit of da'wah in my own, soft da'wah in my own way. We get into the conversation, and he's talking me through the nuances of his engagement with the Muslim community, right? He's talking about how, I know it's a big deal, not accepting interest, etc., etc. But obviously, I'm not saying that's you, but obviously I deal with a lot of Muslims who I sell my interest products with as well, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And he's showing me how, you Muslims, you do it all, right? You do it all. I know you all do it all, but... And I have to kind of try to express this I have to explain this to him in a nuanced way without necessarily throwing my fellow brothers and sisters under the bus. They're an evil bunch, that lot, who get interest-bearing products or something like that. No, right? But the point is, there is a simple logic to this. By the way, that logic is so deeply important in Islam that it is the line between Islam and Kufr. And that logic is, young man, I didn't say that to him, but he's much younger. Young man, you have Christians, right, who believe in their faith, yes, and practice it. And you have Christians who believe in their faith and don't practice it, right? Or at least don't practice it fully. Or choose to practice it in some things, choose to practice it in other things. Choose to follow some prohibitions, don't choose to follow other prohibitions. Okay? We have the same among Muslims. Do you understand? What I can't do is articulate the Muslimness, in this case, doing something haram, right? The Muslimness of my fellow brothers and sisters, whether that is dealing in interest, whether that is dealing in alcohol, right? Whether that is not wearing the hijab, right? I cannot explain that as valid expressions of Islam. I cannot. That is a gross misrepresentation of Islam. A gross misrepresentation of Islam. And it throws Muslims who are trying to practice their deen in very difficult circumstances, sisters who are trying to wear the hijab in really difficult circumstances, it throws them under the bus. Okay? And what do I mean about this line between Islam and Kufr? To accept that something that I am doing as a person, which is against Islam, is not okay. Even though I have completely normalized it. It's my life. It's part of my life. Whether it's I'm not comfortable with the hijab, or whether it's my whole life is around a haram income. To deeply accept the fact that no matter how normalized it is in my life and in my family's life and in my relatives' life and in my friend's circle, it is haram and unacceptable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I must make tawbah. That acknowledgement is a fundamental tenet of Iman. And anybody who does not, obviously I'm not talking about specific individuals here, but this is our aqeedah, that anybody who does not, anybody who normalizes to the point of accepting haram as okay, is outside of the fold of Islam. So it's very, very serious, right? So, can you see how, something that perhaps we could have laughed at, maybe, painfully, of course, actually underlying it are things that are deeply consequential. We have to be careful. We have to do better. We have to learn our deen more. We have to commit better. And if nobody is committing perfectly, at least we must make sure that my version of who I am as a Muslim, we don't represent that as Islam. That is an injustice that Islam does not deserve, that our Muslim brothers and sisters do not deserve. And the non-Muslims who we're supposed to give da'wah to, who we're supposed to represent Islam to, they don't deserve it either, right? And only Allah forgive us for how we will have to answer for this on the Day of Judgment. Inshallah. Let's all, we all make this mistake, by the way. I'm not judging anybody. I've made this mistake, I'm sure. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us model Muslims, ones who people could look to and truly take Islam from. Inshallah ta'ala. Every Jum'ah we say, Allah, help the one who helps Islam and the Muslims and make us among them. And abandon the one who abandons Islam and the Muslims and don't make us among them. That dua applies in today's topic.